Welcome to this Autism Ontario webinar, How to Enhance Physical Activity and Participation. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I will be your host. So one thing that you're noticing that's different is that, I'm standing, I'm not sitting today, and that's because this webinar is unique. We're not just going to be talking about physical activity, we're going to be getting a little physical ourselves as well. So if you didn't know this or you weren't prepared, I got myself some water instead of my standard coffee. I even got myself a little towel because I don't know, what it is that that I've gotten myself into today. But to find that out, really excited to introduce Patrick and Bree, both from CAMH, who will be our presenters today and taking us through this. Guys, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Before we get started, even though this is a unique webinar and we're going to be doing some fun things, the same rules apply. So you can submit your questions at any time using the Ask a Question box, which is right below me. That will be filtered to me, and I will aspire to get you guys answers to your questions. If you have any issues, you can go ahead and click on the help icon. And from time to time, we will be referencing some things that are in the handout section, these PowerPoint slides, as well as some links to some of the standards for physical activity. All right, with all that out of the way, Patrick, maybe you could talk to me a little bit about why are we talking about this today? Like, why is physical activity important enough to do this very unique webcast?
Thanks for that, Matt. We know that physical activity generally has lots of benefits. So we have mental health benefits, where we generally feel better and sometimes a bit less stress after being active. We know that there's impacts on physical health. So we can see usually improvements in our heart health, decreased chances of diabetes. We also know that physical activity is one way to help people just kind of enjoy life, and it's something fun that people do in their leisure time. What's most important, though, is in the context of this global pandemic, is physical activity for me and for some of the groups that we've been running has actually become a new coping tool that people have been using to try and manage the pandemic. Because we know the pandemic has really thrown and changed our lives in ways that we never expected. And the more we've talked to families and families who are having difficulty, we thought this was one way that we could share with others what we've been doing and talk about potential support strategies that other families can use to also potentially cope with the pandemic.
So you guys have been doing some fun things, I think, like virtual workouts or something on Fridays. You guys have been doing this kind of stuff already. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've been doing it since the pandemic started. Really, we kind of kicked into overdrive mode right away and put some stuff together. And we've had some people join us all the way from Finland once. We've had a few people from the U.S., all over Canada, BC, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. The only province we haven't had is Manitoba, but it's been great to see participants come in and out. It's super easygoing and chill. People come and go as they please. And our goal is to both lead a workout for individuals in that hour. We have some physical activity trivia, but also to provide people with the tools so that they can be active on their own time as well. Because that's our goal, is to be able to get people to doing active things for both the mental and health benefits that we've talked about.
Sounds perfect for this series and what is we do here, always trying to provide tools to parents and caregivers and those on the spectrum. So with that, I told everyone I got my towel here, I got my water. Can you just talk us through, what are we going to be doing today? How are we going to be going through this?
Yeah, sure. So as Matt mentioned, we're definitely going to switch things up. We're going to include some physical activity throughout. However, if you're not comfortable doing physical activity, if you've been advised by a doctor not to do physical activity, know that you can sit back and watch. But in between our physical activity, we're also going to talk about how much physical activity should we be getting, and are we meeting those guidelines? We're going to talk about the importance of physical activity, and then we're going to end the presentation of how we can be active during this time. So different tips and strategies. And sorry, Matt, you go ahead.
No, that's good. That's good. So it sounds good. So I think we get started with our warm up. Is that right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
We're gonna get going right away and get moving and grooving, like we say, with a little bit of a warm up to get us into the mood.
All right.
So how we're going to do it?
I'm going to stand on up. Go ahead.
Patrick's going to show us what we're doing. I'm going to lead it. But please know that whatever he's doing, you can actually also do in a chair. So I'm opting out of the warm-up so I can help direct Patrick and you all. But like I said, yeah, please sit down if you feel more comfortable doing that. So we're going to start by doing our neck stretches. So Patrick's going to do 5 neck circles to the right. And here's his last one. We're going to switch over and do those neck circles on the left. So it's important to understand, why do we warm up? So the main thing is that it prevents injuries. It warms up our muscles. And if he ends those, he's going to march on the spot for 30 seconds. And like I said, you can do this in a chair. So if you feel comfortable, you can still move your hands in the chair and march your legs. So we'll be doing that for about 30 seconds. And the other cool thing about a warm-up is it's very much physical, but it's also mental. So it really helps prepare you for that workout. So we have about 10 seconds left. Awesome. So let's switch, and we're going to do knee to elbow, and we're going to also do that for 30 seconds. And this time I'm going to time it. So you can see that Patrick brings his right elbow to his left knee, and then he does the opposite. So left elbow to his right knee. We can see Matt doing it too. That's awesome. So the other important thing about warm-ups is you actually want to tailor them to your workout. And we'll get into this just shortly because you got 2 seconds left. Awesome job, guys. And we're going to end with the most common, and it's jumping jacks. So 30 seconds. So yeah, so you want to tailor this to your workout. So it's important. So let's just say I'm going for a run. And it's like a quite fast-paced run. So a good warm-up for that might be a jog. As opposed to if I was going for a jog, a warm-up might be more practical for that, would be like a light walk. And we got 5 more seconds, guys. Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. So that was our quick, super short warm-up. Thanks for everybody participating in that.
Is there parameters? Sorry, I just need to get my water there after those jumping jacks. Is there parameters for how long we should warm up based around the activity that we're planning on doing?
Yeah, so I think that the general rule is you actually really want to tailor your warm-up to the activity. So let's say you're going to do a really intense long workout. Some warm-ups can be up to like 30 minutes, and that's what we really see in like major sports. However, generally, if you're just doing like a moderate workout, 5 to 10 minutes is pretty good.
Excellent.
Awesome. So now we're going to get into the physical activity guidelines, and Patrick's going to take that for us.
Thanks, Bree. Just like there's a few guidelines for a warm-up, depending on what we're doing, in Canada, we have a few physical activity guidelines to help us get an understanding of how much we should be doing, how often, and when we should be doing it. So there's generally this type of 4 principles. It's called the frequency, the intensity, the type, and the time. That's called the FIT principle. And based on that, we kind of base how much we should be doing and how often. And the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology has developed these guidelines. And they are age specific, where we have guidelines from as soon as the little ones, from 0 to 4 years, where infants, for example, less than 1 year, should be doing active things throughout the day, and especially floor-based play, which we know is a big thing for little ones, but also for toddlers and preschoolers, where the recommendation is to do at least 180 minutes of physical activity at any intensity throughout the day. So that could be running, jumping, hopping, organized sports. And the general rule of thumb for the little ones is that the more activity they can get into their day, the better it is. As we move up in terms of the age categories, we also suggest that for kids 5 and 11, that they achieve about 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity of physical activity every single day. So what's moderate? Well, moderate would be something like an easy walk, where you can have a conversation with someone on the phone or next beside you. And if you're not out of breath, that's a moderate activity. But now if you're walking or jogging and you're trying to have that conversation and it's hard to talk and keep that conversation going because you're breathing faster, that would be the definition of something that's more vigorous. So the recommendation is to do about vigorous, intense activities at least 3 times a week, where you really have your heart rate a bit faster and your lungs are going a bit harder to get some more air. But the important thing for kids as well is to do activities that promote bone strength. So things that are like running, jumping, so that, again, they can strengthen their bones early on, because we know that that has long-term benefit as they get older. For our teenagers...
So, Patrick, before you do that, I just got a question for you, because I actually have a 12-year-old who doesn't, he likes music and he's on the iPad a lot and the like. And so, I have been struggling to get him out and about. He's been going for socially distanced bike rides and stuff. When I was young and playing sports, they always said you don't want to like start doing workouts too early. But, would it make sense if he's not getting that vigorous activity that I, take him out for a jog or something like that, a couple times a week, and tell him that we just got to get this going because it's not happening?
Absolutely. And I think if he's keen on it, the one thing we do know is that kids who are active as children are more likely to be active as adults. And we're now seeing that in the autism population slowly, where we actually started taking this study a bit more seriously. And so in Canada, there's one study that looked at youth who were active in their youth years, and actually those who weren't as active when they were youth, they were also not active in their adult years. So as much as we can promote and get kids engaged now in any way, we see that there's a longer term benefit. And it can be activity of any kind, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily playing sport. It doesn't have to be sprinting or running a marathon. It could be anything, like you said, a jog, even doing some body weight exercises, skipping. A bike ride is a great way, especially in our social distance world right now. So absolutely, any small ideas help both now and into the future.
Sounds good. All right, I'll let you move on.
All right. Speaking of our youth, age 12 to 17, the recommendation is also similar, where we say that we want about 60 minutes of activity, both moderate to vigorous, every single day, and around at least 3 times a week. And again, generally the rule of thumb is if they can do more, the better it is. For the adults on the webinar, we have similar recommendations, where there's 150 minutes of moderate activity for people ages 18 to 64. And as we get older, not sure if this is common knowledge, but our bones tend to get weaker if we don't use them. Just like our muscles, our common principle is if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So the most important thing as we get older as adults is to keep doing bone strengthening and muscle building activities so that we don't lose our things. And we know, especially in older individuals, those who have better, for example, grip strength in their hands are less likely to fall and get injured than those who don't. So again, activity really is important throughout the entire life course. And we see the same thing happening in our senior years, where we want them to accumulate about 150 minutes of activity. And again, the more we do, generally speaking, the better. But how does this relate to overall children in Canada, Bree?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we'll just move on to the next slide here. So Canada does something really cool, and they do a report card for physical activity. So they give us a grade. And if we look at the slide, we can see that we're actually not doing so well. So this is just looking at people between the ages 5 and 17, and we got a D+. So that really means that only 35% of these people in that age range are getting the recommended physical activity. And then if we look at children between the ages 3 and 4, 62%. So it's a little bit better, but really this number should be close to 100%. And then something that they've done recently is that they've been giving adult report cards. And also adults aren't doing so well either. So if we look at those 5 to 17-year-olds and the 3 to 4-year-olds, some might question, why aren't they getting active? And what we're also finding in this report card and these guidelines is that these children are actually engaging in a little bit more screen time than they should. So if we look at the stats here, we have 51% of children between the ages of 5 and 17 are engaging in more screen time than what's recommended. And if we look at 3 to 4-year-olds, this is a lot worse. And it's 72% of these little guys are engaging in a little bit more screen time. So why is this problematic? And the thing is that—
if you don't mind, sorry for interrupting your thought, Bree,
Yeah,
but
please.
I assume that we've been on a trajectory of poorer grades for a little while. But is there any, I mean, it's got to have gotten even, we might be in Fs right now with COVID-19, I have to imagine. Do you guys have any information on what's going on right now and if it has gotten worse?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Matt. I don't know that they've come out with any actual evidence just yet. But I know that what we've been hearing from researchers and just families is that they're struggling to be active. And COVID has definitely disrupted our daily routines. And one of that is going to the gym or just the way you got physical activity. So if you think about sport teams, that's canceled. So if that was your primary way of engaging in physical activity, now that's kind of gone. And if you think about YMCA or Special Olympics, those things have been put on hold. So I think definitely what we are going to see is hard numbers that really support that inactivity. And hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll take away some tips and tricks of being active after. But yes, I think we're going to see a decline again because of COVID. And what's the problem and what's the issue? And Patrick mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, and we'll delve a little bit deeper, but physical activity is really important. So it's great for our physical health, but it's also super important for things like self-worth, self-esteem, mental health, concentration, and memory. So these grades do take into account children and adults with disabilities, but why don't we just look at people with autism and whether they're getting their physical activity? So we'll just move on to the next slide here. Oh, sorry about that, skipped. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Matt, maybe if you control it, might be a bit better.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so what are we hearing about the research? So Jones et al. Did a systematic study, and what that means is they've kind of taken a lot of the studies that have looked at physical activity and autism, and then they tell us a general conclusion. So many of these studies compare autistic children to their typically developing peers. And I will note there's mixed results, but the general consensus is that autistic children are not as active as their peers, and they are spending a little bit more time on screen time. And then we see on the studies on the left-hand side, they kind of look at factors that might enhance this inactivity among these autistic children. And what we see there is that children with autism and an ID and an intellectual disability are more likely to be inactive. And then the bottom study, it's the bottom study, found something that was really striking. So they found autistic boys between the ages of 6 and 11 were actually significantly less active than their typically developing peers. And so why is this so striking and why is this so problematic? Is because Patrick actually mentioned this at the beginning, when Matt asked a question about his 12-year-old son, is during this time between 6 and 11, we develop these habits. So so if you're active in between those ages, you're more likely to be active when you're older. Now, if you're significantly less active than your peers, we might predict that this might support unhealthy behaviors and put these children at risk for health problems such as obesity and diabetes. So we really want to correct that. So this really highlights a need for work for trying to promote some type of intervention that encourages children with autism to be active. And I also want to highlight autistic adults. And we're also seeing something very similar, that they're inactive and that they're particularly inactive when compared to the general population. So there's reasons for this discrepancy, though. So the autistic population might experience barriers that the general population doesn't. And I'm going to let Patrick delve into these barriers.
All right. So we're not blaming anyone with autism for being inactive. We know how highly complex life can be sometimes when you have autism or are raising a child with autism. And one of those complexities is actually the lack of opportunities and resources. So some of the research that I've done in Toronto and in the Greater Toronto area, we looked at what's available. And sadly, some organizations actually exclude people with autism because if they can't find a support worker or if there's not a program offered, families will not opt in to join. So one of our challenges is to create more opportunities to be active. We also see a financial burden. Being active usually in an organized setting or even hiring a support worker, for example, to help facilitate if needed. I mean, that's a burden that some families can't bear, and we totally understand that. And that is one of those factors that are associated with having lower levels of activity. The other thing is time constraints. We know families of kids with autism are extremely busy. There are a million things going on. And sometimes the last thing that's on the agenda is to get the kid active. And as hard as it is, we understand that families do need that sort of balance as well. And so Bree and I are not saying that it's parents' fault for being inactive, but we're actually highlighting what are some of the challenges that families are talking about. And that is one of them, is the lack of time. Another one that we have learned, and from my work and Bree's work talking to actual youth with autism, is there's this idea of a lack of motivation where they might not be interested, they might not want to do active things, they might want to do their iPad or other non-active things. And so our job then as researchers and as parents and as community leaders is to find ways in which we can enhance their motivation. And that's kind of some of the ongoing work that we're doing. Along with some parents, we also see a fear of injury. I mean, I think we can all agree that activity sometimes can be scary and can be risky if they're doing something like gymnastics, for example, and there's that real fear of injury or fear of hurting themselves for a variety of reasons or getting hurt by other people. So for sure, we see families not enrolling as a result of that. And the last thing, which Bree will also talk about a little bit later, is that there's challenges with movement patterns. So running, hopping, jumping, skipping, those fundamental movement skills in kids with autism and even in youth, what we see is that there are delays in those skills. And one of those things that I said earlier, if you don't use it, you lose it, also hangs true here, because if we don't develop these skills early on, it's a little harder to develop after. But fear not, because today, and our next component that Bree's going to lead, we're going to get you guys moving and grooving. And hopefully Matt is ready for that as well.
I think I am. Question for you before we get there. You mentioned something that we've heard before, because we've had we did it at one. We did a presentation where we had a trainer who owns a gym that's got a lot of supports in it, and in that fear, right? Like there was a fear by both parents. There was a lack of maybe opportunities when the children were young to join different organized sports because there was a challenge. I'm assuming since you're working in this field that you've worked with a number of parents or those on the spectrum, and you've got some good stories about once introducing these types of activities, what benefits outside of general physical health they drive. Can you talk to a little bit about that before we jump in on our next exercise?
Absolutely. I think so. I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and in Toronto, I used to lead a group called the Extraordinary Youth Council, where our goal is to meet up on Fridays, hang out, do active things, and do recreation things. And the hardest thing, like anything that's new or challenging, is getting started. Mm-hmm. And being consistent while you're trying something new can be scary, right? Because it's a new thing. We don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do it, maybe. But for those who we can support along the way and we can develop kind of new interests or new movement patterns, the payoff is huge. So for my group, for example, the biggest thing that I noticed was a huge increase in socialization. And we know for families and parents especially, I mean, that's one of the benefits that parents are looking for, is to make friends and to hang out and to talk. And even if they're not nonverbal, to have that opportunity to be with other people. And for our work, I mean, that's one of the biggest benefits that people take away, is having that ability to hang out and even just to get a break from family life and school life. Because, you know, having a child with autism when they're in school under different circumstances is pretty predictable, right? You go to school, you come back, you do your work, and there's all those other challenges that come along the way. So doing active things for us and talking with some of the youth is that being active actually gives them a break. And for some of them, they found activity as like a refuge, as a safe space for them to just take a break from life. Or if they're too stressed, from camouflaging their kind of non-autistic behaviors. They use activity as a way to try and cope with the challenges that they've experienced. So again, the hardest part's always starting, but once we can kind of support them along the way, to me and from our experience, the payoff has been pretty big.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring back Bree, because I think we're ready to get started with our next exercise.
All right, guys. So this time we're going to switch it up a bit. Bree's going to be demonstrating. I'm going to be narrating. And we're going to do a mini quick workout for you guys, just to give you an idea of what you can do. So sometimes I think people almost overcomplicate what working out is. We all assume that right away we've got to be in the gym for an hour, got to work super hard, or we got to be doing sports. But as Bree's going to show you, I mean, activity is really just the movement of your muscles in any different way. And as a result, we're going to show you guys a mini workout that you can do either seated, especially in this thing that Bree's going to do. And again, it's incorporating throughout your day. It all adds up, and there's benefits. Bree, are you ready?
Ready.
All right, she's ready to rock and roll. So Bree's going to start with some external rotations with her arms. So we did an arm warm up, but now Bree's doing the rotations kind of in that 90-degree bent position. And what we want to do is bend your elbows up and down, and that helps strengthen your shoulder muscles, especially when it comes to posture. I know about me, I have a pretty bad posture at the computer, and doing these external rotations helps our back health and our shoulders to stay healthy as we get older. So she's going to do a few more. You can either do that with just your arms, or if you really want to challenge yourselves, you can get some water bottles or even add some weights. But we don't want to go heavier than 5 pounds because those are small back muscles that get tired really easily. All right, good job, Bree. The next one that Bree's going to show us is a good morning exercise. So Bree, do you want to go ahead and demonstrate that? So in the good morning, you're going to scoot to the front of your chair. And as you're at the front of your chair, you're going to bend forward with your hands staying behind your back. So the goal of this is to kind of work at your posture by bending at the weights. We're really almost reminding our body what it's like to bend as a hinge joint. And so if you guys remember, a door is kind of a hinge, right? Because it opens and closes and bends. So that's what Bree's doing. She's hinging her body forward. The focus is to try and feel a stretch in your hamstrings. So again, it's a bit of a total body workout, and you want to try and keep your back straight. Again, working on posture. So she's going to do about 10, and we're going to give her a break after that. So again, this is a great workout for your upper body, but also gets your lower body engaged as well. And again, we don't have to complicate workouts. We keep them simple, keep them short, keep them fun. You want to put in some music in the background. I know that helps me going if I'm at my desk and doing a few movements. All right, Bree. The next one, we're going to do a leg extension workout. So you can move back a bit and show some space for your legs. So you're going to sit again at the edge of your chair, hold on to where the corners are, and you're going to lift your leg up and down to about the level of your hip. The goal is to try and keep your leg straight, and this is a great way to engage your quadriceps muscles. So those are the muscles at the front of your leg, and those are really, really important to help with our balance, our walking. And if we have strong quadriceps and hamstrings, which are at the back of our leg, we're less likely to get all kinds of injuries, especially if you're doing active things. The other thing is, by doing this exercise, some of you might feel it actually is engaging your core muscles, and those muscles keep our bodies upright and strong and healthy. So by scooting up the edge of your chair, you're engaging our core and also doing our legs. So we're trying to incorporate two things at once, getting our double bang for our buck. All right. The second last one, we have faux skipping. So if you have a skipping rope and you have space at home and you want to, feel free to do some skipping. But faux skipping is skipping, but without the actual skipping rope. So as you'll see, Bree's going to be moving her hands up and down in a circular motion. She's also rotating and want to be on the balls of your feet. So this helps with coordination. And the cool thing about activities that we know in seniors who are more active and they're doing active things, there's actually an increase in memory and in cognition, where your brain is actually active and remembering things. So by remembering a pattern such as a faux skip, it actually activates the memory part of our brain, and it helps us to then transform that information to other parts of our lives where we can remember things like phone numbers, friends, names, etc. So that's a faux skip. Again, if you want to do the harder version, then you can do that with a real skipping rope. And the last one Bree's going to show us is a ab exercise. And so as you're going to see, she puts her hands kind of across, and she twists from one side gently to the other. The important thing is you don't want to do it too fast. You don't want to aggravate your back if you've been sitting all day. But again, this helps us really with our posture especially, and engages our core muscles. And those core muscles, again, like I said before, if we don't use our muscles, we lose them. They get lazy. So they figure out, why should they do work if they don't have to? And this is one way to keep them happy and keep them engaged and working hard so that they can keep us upright and healthy in all of our aspects of daily life. All right, Bree, thanks for being the best TV model there is.
That was awesome. Thanks, Patrick, for leading me through that.
All right. Just before we move on, I want to remind our audience that I know that you're up and you're active and you're getting moving. I know I sure am, but we're still here to answer your questions. So although we've got more of this to come, submit your questions at any time using the Ask Question box. They'll get to me, and I will aspire to get you some answers from Patrick and from Bree. So so the first one, you were standing, Patrick. This next one, Bree, you were in a chair. So clearly those are modifications to some of the traditional workouts which is very important when you're either introducing working out, or you have some disabilities maybe, or at an advanced age. So how do people learn about some of these modifications? Where's a good place for them to get an idea of, you go to YouTube and you're going to see, fitness exercises of people doing some crazy stuff. How is it that we learn to do these exercises safely and the like?
Yeah, so one way, if you go into YouTube, for example, and you put adapted anything, so if you want to do yoga and you put adapted yoga, you will see that there's modifications made to traditional yoga practice. And the instructors there have actually broken down yoga in a more accessible way so that people can participate in all kinds of different activities. So what Bree did, for example, is an adapted fitness exercise, right? So we took general exercises that you'll see on YouTube, people being hardcore and extreme, and we adapted it to ways in which people who aren't as active or have mobility challenges or are learning for the first time are able to do it. And we know if people try an activity and you fail at it, 99% of the time you're not going to do it again. If it's too hard and you don't like it, you're not going to do it again. So by starting small and adapting the activity so you can break it down and then build it back up, that's one way in which we find especially helpful for people with autism to break the activities down so that they can then do it on their own.
You often see the disclaimers on a commercial. Don't do this without first consulting your doctor. I noticed you both, I didn't go into your whole history, you have a whole bunch of letters after your names. Before introducing something like this, is that legalese, or is that an important step to take, is to consult with your doctor before introducing some of these activities?
Absolutely. I think that if you haven't been physically active and this is something new, it would be a good idea to consult your doctor and just make sure that you're able to do these exercises without any health concerns or issues arising. But the other thing you want to keep in mind too is that you're your own expert, right? So anything that you engage in shouldn't be painful and it shouldn't hurt. And if anything is hurting, then that's definitely the time to stop and talk to a doctor.
And Matt, one of the most interesting things, we used to go to the doctor and they prescribe us either a therapy or a medication, but there's a whole new movement actually where doctors are prescribing exercise as a form of medicine. And it's a new wave of medicine, which it's about 10 years old, but doctors are realizing that, for some conditions such as, if you have high blood pressure, before traditionally put you on medication only, but now by combining those two options, slow walking plus medication, we're actually seeing better outcomes. So in a way, exercise is medicine, and we don't have to overcomplicate it. Sometimes you forget that exercise can include housework. It could include chores, mopping, cleaning up the front yard or the backyard. I mean, that's intensive work, and it counts. Going up and down stairs, carrying groceries, any of that we sometimes don't count as activity, that all counts. And the more we can do it in small steps, it all adds up.
Before we move on, just a bunch of things are popping in my head. How do you guys feel about those activity trackers? Like the idea of the watch or the phone activity tracker. Do you find with people that are getting into it that that's a good step to take in order to ensure they're getting the activity in that they're looking for on a day-to-day basis?
I love them. I think it's important to monitor progression, and it's also important to assess how you're doing. And I think that it's really easy. These activity trackers have made it really easy to set goals for yourself. So for an example, I'll use mine to try and get my 10,000 steps. And I'll constantly check my phone throughout the day, and then I'll realize, oh, wow, I'm only at 2,000 steps and it's 4 o'clock. I should probably get walking. So it really acts as a motivator, but it also allows me to set goals for myself and see if I can get to those goals. So I personally really like them.
And so even if Bree doesn't reach her 10,000 steps, it's also okay. Some days we feel better than others. I know on Monday I wanted to go for a jog, but I just felt groggy after a bike ride on Saturday. And so I said, I'm going to listen to my body. And I took that day off. And yesterday I was able to actually go and do my jog, and I felt way better than if I did it on Monday. So those steps and those trackers are definitely helpful, but I think the best tracker that you can possibly follow is your body. If you're sore and you're in pain and it's telling you shouldn't be doing it, 99.9% of the time it's right. It knows. So that is the best tracker to follow.
And that goes for everybody, right? The advanced athlete or somebody who's just getting back into it. So sorry for derailing. We want to talk about it keeps popping up because there are so many benefits, but we want to talk about the benefits of physical activity, Patrick. So why don't you take us through that?
Absolutely. And so the benefits we're going to talk about are specific to individuals with autism spectrum disorder. And so across research, and we've talked about this a little bit about COVID, is that there's enhances in mental health. So in research settings, what we see is people who are active, for example, do 20 minutes on the bike or on the treadmill. There's a decrease in anxiety levels. There's a decrease in stress levels. And even the stress hormone cortisol, we've noticed that there's decreases in that hormone after doing some exercise. And so, again, especially where anxiety is really a prevalent and big issue in autism, where some people, where up to 60% of the population can have anxiety, exercise might be one way to help kind of taper and lower that anxiety sometimes by being active. The other major thing that is huge for us generally, and especially for people with autism, is that it gives us a sense of routine and predictability. So if I know that every single day at 10 a.m. I'm going to go for a walk or an exercise of any kind, it helps me build that structure into my day. And I know about myself, having that kind of predictability and knowing what I'm going to do is actually what helps motivate me to be active. And especially during this time of COVID-19, where we've lost tons of routines, we've lost all kinds of structures, doing active things gives us a sense of control, because a lot of COVID-19 is very uncontrollable. We have no control what's going to happen. So by being active, it kind of helps us feel in control again. It also helps develop social skills and motor skills, and Bree's going to talk to that in a minute. But before, we never used to talk about the importance of activity and social skills. But now we're finding that by being more active, kids with autism are actually developing social skills and have better language expression, and Bree's going to talk to that in a minute. And like we talked about, there's also improvements in physical health. So improving our heart, decreasing our chances of diabetes, but also our brain health. And again, like I said, when we're active, we get more oxygen to our brains, and that helps with making sure that as we get older, that our brains are functioning in a healthy way. We also have benefits for mental health challenges. And again, when we combine physical activity and mental health interventions for people with autism, we're slowly seeing that there are improvements that are greater than just doing either physical activity on its own or mental health interventions on its own. So before, we never used to talk about physical activity as an intervention tool in autism, but slowly through some of the research Bree and I are doing, that's what we're finding. And Bree's going to talk to us a little bit about the impacts of social and motor skills.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. So what we really know is that people with autism struggle or have social challenges. In fact, it's one of the core components. It's a diagnostic criteria. But what we're also finding out is that people along the spectrum also have motor difficulties. So some common ones are coordination difficulties, balance, motor planning. So these are becoming more and more recognized by researchers. And what we're also recognizing is that there's this really unique relationship between social skills and motor skills. So what we see is when a child with autism or an adult with autism has poor motor skills, they also struggle with social. And then we also see the opposite. So when they have social challenges, greater social challenges, they also have greater motor challenges. So there's definitely a reciprocal relationship. And what happens is that these social challenges can act as a barrier to motor development. And then the opposite is true. So some of my research and talking to caregivers, I hear perfect examples of these. So for an example, a mother was talking to me about how her daughter felt like she was really clumsy. She wasn't a skilled soccer player, so she didn't play soccer with her friends. So not only did that prevent her from getting these social skills or building on her social skills, but it also prevented her on building those motor skills. So recently, something really cool that researchers have been doing is looking at physical activity interventions. So they've had, let's just say they vary, but between 8 to 12 weeks of physical activity interventions for children along the spectrum. And what they predicted is that this would enhance their motor skills, which it did. But what they also found is that it actually enhanced their social skills as well. So what we're seeing is that by increasing physical activity, it will also address these social challenges, but it will also build their motor skills. And so what it also kind of does too is it enhances their confidence. So if they feel more confident in their physical activity abilities, then they'll be more likely to socialize and go into, say, soccer games or whatnot and build those motor skills. So that's a social and motor relationship.
So we've learned, sorry about that. But we learned a lot about that importance of confidence a couple of weeks ago when we were just talking about general mental health as it relates to those on the spectrum or in general. And I think that, you know, the way that you guys are introducing this, I gotta think that, you know, you must be seeing this even in these small sort of virtual events and stuff. Just getting people going has that confidence impact. Is that what you guys have been seeing as you've been starting these classes and the like?
Absolutely. So it's incredibly fascinating. So even though our Fit Friday sessions are drop-in, we see a lot of the same participants returning. And because of the same participants returning, we can see their progression. So I can think of a few participants that would come and they'd be very shy. Sometimes they'd have their cameras off or they'd be muted. And I don't really think that they were too involved in the workout. And now that we've ran several of these, I think we might be on week 8, maybe week 7, you can see a huge progression. So these same kids are coming in and they're extremely social. They're saying hi to one another and they are engaging in the workouts. So it's really great.
All right. So you guys are going to take us through a warm down, I understand. Bree, you're going to walk us through it, but we've got but Patrick's going to be doing it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
All right.
Okay, Patrick,
All right.
Are you ready?
I am ready. I'm going to do it in my chair this time for a little cool down.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with a neck stretch. So we're going to stretch both sides of the neck. So Patrick's going to start with the front, and he's going to hold down gently. Again, just like working out, this shouldn't be painful. You should feel that stretch, and if it's painful, then you're going to want to release that stretch. Awesome. And now he's going to go to his left side, at least my left. Awesome. And then he switches it up. So it's really important when you're stretching, you want to be balanced. So whatever you do on the right side, you want to do on the left side. Great. And now Patrick's going to do a tricep stretch. So he's going to stretch one arm across his body and gently push down. So as I mentioned with our warm-up, we do a warm-up to warm up our muscles. And now we're doing a cool down to cool down our muscles and bring our heart rate back to its normal rate. And then Patrick's going to switch onto the other side. And some people will ask how long they should hold a stretch. And some people hold it as short as 10 seconds, but some people hold it as long as 60 seconds. So again, you want to keep in mind, you want to hold the stretch to feel the stretch, and it shouldn't be painful. Now Patrick's going to stretch his wrists, which I think we can all do by sitting at a computer and writing all day. Stretching your wrists is very nice. And again, he'll do that on his right side or my right side, and then he'll switch over to his left side. So when we work out our muscles, when we work out our muscles really hard, they build something called lactic acid. So what happens with stretching is it actually removes that lactic acid, because when we don't remove it, it can create muscle soreness. So you'll find as you stretch, the next day you might be less sore from your workout. And so now Patrick's going to do a lower body stretch. And how he's going to do this is he's going to lean forward and try and touch his toes. It's kind of difficult to see.
But just bend forward and touch your toes.
There you go. So stretching is super important for that. You increase your flexibility. It also prevents that pain, but it also boosts energy. Okay, and our last stretch is going to focus on our torso. So he's going to stretch to the right and hold that for a bit. And then he's going to switch sides, and this will be our last stretch. So it's important. So whatever workout you did, if it really focused on upper body, you really want to stretch out that upper body, and the opposite is true for legs. Or sorry, the same is true for legs. Great job.
And I don't know about you guys, but for me, after a little stretch session, even like that, it helps me really calm down. And especially for kids on the spectrum, that's why yoga is a great option, or any sort of stretching series. I know with some of the kids that I've worked with in my time in the field, we've used stretching as a way to calm down, especially before bedtime. And so if we can get the heart rate to go down a bit, and to get kids especially if you focus that with breathing, it's a huge technique to help kids somewhat calm down if available at that time.
Excellent. Do you find when you're working with those on the spectrum, are there certain either aspects of this, warm up, the exercise part, the stretch, or certain types of activities that are, I don't know, easier to get them to do, where there's less pushback?
Yeah, so for me, at least in my experience, sports are tough. I mean, sports are complicated because there's a lot of movement going on. There's that social piece. There's a lot of those social cues. For example, if we're playing soccer, you're supposed to play defense on someone, but you can't touch them, but you're supposed to get the ball. So there's all these things going on. And sometimes what happens is that it becomes overload. And so a participant might have a hard time with that because there's so many different things going on. Now, with work and the right environment, that's possible. But in my experience, some of the things that work best, like I said, are yoga. Karate is a great way to be active, but also to get that sort of movement and energy out, especially if a kid's really tense and needs to get that pent up energy out. Taekwondo is another great one. Walking, skipping rope. I mean, the group activities can be challenging, but if we can modify them and do individual ones as well, that to me has been the greatest success point.
Excellent. Well, for any of you who are looking for, places in your community or help finding locations that are inclusionary, the spot to go. It's autismontario.com. So we've got about, looks like we got about 10 minutes left, guys. We got some slides we need to get through and some questions. So I think, Bree, you're going to take us through this next part.
I will. So as we mentioned, we're going to end the presentation or the webinar with some ideas and strategies of how we can increase physical activity. So we're going to first talk about these evidence-informed strategies. So there's been a lot of research in exploring different strategies that will enhance physical activity. So we have a list of them here that I'll briefly go through just in the name of time. So the one thing that we want to pay attention to is delivery of instruction. So we want to make sure that they're simple, that it's concise, and that it's consistent. So for an example, if a child you're working with refers to a plastic ball as a plastic ball at home, you want to use that same term, plastic ball, in the physical activity setting. The next one is self-monitoring. This one I really like. So a researcher explored how effective self-monitoring was. Now, the next one is cueing. So cueing can be verbal cueing or gesture cueing, and both are effective. And these can act as simple reminders. If a child wanders off, you can direct them or you can tell them go that way. So they can be very simple, short cues. The next one is reinforcement. So this also goes with praise. So reinforcement can be done in different ways. So there's edible reinforcement, so providing food, or there can be rewards reinforcements. So the one thing about reinforcement is you want to do it consistent. So let's just say after every 5 exercises, you're going to provide that reinforcement. So whether it's, hey, good job, or providing a reward, so a sticker. But you do want to make that consistent, as I mentioned, but you can also fade that out as a child becomes more engaged in the activity. You might be able to remove that positive reinforcement. And then we can go on to the next slide there. So as I mentioned, praise and reinforcement kind of go hand in hand. And then there's something called prompting. And prompting, there's this hierarchy of prompts. So physical prompting would be like if I put my hand over somebody else's hand to throw a ball. Now that's the most restrictive prompting. And then the next would be picture, modeling. And then the least restrictive would be gesture, which would just be like our cueing we talked about on the last slide, which would be pointing. So the most effective way to do prompting is do fade prompting. So start with that physical, which is most restrictive, and fade it out so that you're just doing the gesture, and then eventually you don't need any prompting. And then environment arrangements is so important. So one thing you probably want to avoid is a large crowded place. You want to also make sure that the environment is sensory friendly. So you want to pay attention to things such as light. Are the lights too bright? Does a gym have a strong echo? So you want to control those things and really make sure that the child feels safe in their environment. And the last thing kind of goes hand in hand with the question that Matt asked earlier about these tracking devices. It's important to assess your progress. So it's important for the child to see how well they're doing. So for an example, if they set a goal that they could only do 1 push-up, but by the end of the week, they wanted to do 3 push-ups. It's really great to see that, you know, you met your goal, but it's also good for you as a coach or a caregiver to assess the child to see if they're improving or not. Because if they're not improving, it might not be the fault of the child, but it might be the strategies you're using. So you might need to modify them a bit. So that leads me to my last point about these strategies, is that you really want to make them individualized. So every child's different. So one strategy that might have worked for one child might not work for the other child. So it's important to look into that. And the next strategies that Patrick are going to talk about are just things that we've pulled from our practical experience.
Thanks, Bree. And a lot of these strategies that we posted here online, you really did a great job explaining. And I think we want to close our presentation, save some questions with time, just for some tips and tricks that we've learned. So one of the biggest things that we've learned in our experience is really picking a time each day and going for that exercise, if it's a walk or if it's any activity. If you can say every single day at 10 a.m., this is what you're going to commit to based on your schedule, or after dinner. That's one way, is to really build it into your schedule and keep it consistent. The other examples, for example, you can do an active thing after, for example, being sitting on the couch for a long time or doing something sedentary at your desk, using, you know, the washroom, you do 3 squats or 3 push-ups, anything in which you do something that just incorporates into your day. Those small things, what we call exercise snacks, they add up. And so let's say you do 3 squats each time you use the washroom 3 times. Well, that's 9 squats throughout the day. And boom, you've done more active things without even realizing. One of the other things you can do is setting an alarm. So put on the alarm, and let's say you have 15 minutes that you can devote to your activity. Boom, 15 minutes comes and goes, and you're done. The most important thing that we've really tried to emphasize is making it fun. We know that if there's something you don't want to do and you haven't done it before and you're hesitant to learn, if it sucks and you don't have fun, you're less likely to do it over and over. So if we can find ways to incorporate an activity, make it fun, especially if a child with autism has a special interest, for example. So I had one participant who loved planes, and when we would do activities, we would run with our hands out like an airplane. And that was a huge way to get him engaged, and using their special interests sometimes to focus on their strengths rather than only their deficits, which is common in our field, is another great way in which we can get kids more active and individuals of all ages more active. And with that, Matt, that's everything we had today.
You just said about sort of the running with the planes, is that with some older kids, it makes sense to schedule, like I was talking about my son. We can schedule time and say, okay, we're going to go for a run since we're not getting activity elsewhere. But with traditional sports and eye-to-hand coordination being a struggle, do you have suggestions or potentially a resource you can point parents and caregivers who have young children on the spectrum to give them some ideas for how to, you know, turn play into, you know, physical activity?
Absolutely. We have a few handouts here. And what we're going to be doing after this webinar, we've actually also written a blog post. So in that blog post, we're going to have a few more tips and tricks for parents, but also direct links that you can click on, and that will take you to these resources. One of the biggest resources that are easy to get and easy to access is Special Olympics. They do a really good job, both Special Olympics Canada and Special Olympics Ontario. They do a great job really breaking down activities, providing examples, providing even online workouts given the COVID pandemic. So that's definitely one place to check it out, and definitely check out our blog post after today if you have some time.
Nice. Just one more question. And again, this is more sort of in that age specific ratio is have you had better experience with like older folks on the spectrum or going outside to make this happen? Because just going outside now is such a treat for all of us. We spend most of our time inside of our few walls. Or have you found that you've had more success doing it at home in the comforts without the onlookers who potentially may be out in the backyard or at the park or whatever it might be?
For me personally, I mean, this is, I guess, pre-COVID. I was always keen on getting people outside if they were comfortable. And in the group that we ran, one of my things was, you know, I wanted participants to be comfortable in their own communities, going out and participating either through a walk, or we partnered, for example, with the Toronto Public Library. And to me, that was a big point to get them engaged and to participate in daily life. Obviously, with COVID, we have a bit of a different situation. And I think because of that, we need to adapt to our situation. And if we can do online things or things at home, I think some parents and families and individuals might prefer to be at home because it's a bit of a safer and more predictable environment. And that works. So it's really trying to, again, tailor to what the individual needs are. And that's our take-home message, is tailor to individual needs and abilities and focus on the strengths, because we focus a lot on deficits in the field. And sometimes that really removes the abilities of the person. So focus on those strengths, incorporate the activity, and have fun. That's kind of our key messages.
Well, you know, you got your chance to do your moment of Zen there, and I think you covered it off really well. But Bree, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with before we go off the air today? Any message you hope that they heard?
Yeah, I hope that everybody is able to take something from this presentation and maybe set a small goal for yourself to engage in a little bit of physical activity. But I think it's super important. Don't be hard on yourself. Do what you can do. Mark it as an accomplishment, and if you can, build on it the next week.
Excellent. And so with that, we have come to the end of our time. I want to thank everybody for the time that you took today. Hopefully you got a little bit of a sweat going and in the middle of the day. It's been a lot of fun, guys. First time I've ever had to have a water bottle with me while I do one of these. A reminder to our audience, this presentation will be available online tomorrow. You can check out Connecting with Us virtually at Autism Ontario. And if you know anybody who you think may benefit from this presentation, whether it be someone in the community, a caregiver, or someone on the spectrum, share this webinar or any of our webinars with them. As you know, they're free. And the more people that we get through them, the more good we can do, but also the more of these webinars we can put on. And so with that, I will say thank you to our guests, and that I look forward to seeing each of you on the next Autism Ontario webinar.